Hi, and welcome to the latest Fantasy Author Chat. Tonight we have Dennis K. Crosby. Welcome, Dennis.
Hey Diane, how are you?
I'm great. Good to see you. Dennis is the author of, as you can see, Death's Legacy and Death's Debt. I have Death's Legacy right here. And urban fantasy with some supernatural stuff going on. And it's a very fun book. I'm reading it right now, so I can't wait to dig in. But first, let's talk about you, Dennis. And
Yeah,
just to preface by saying that I've known Dennis for, gosh, I don't know, at least 5 years now from
yeah,
coffee house in San Diego when I used to live down there. So yeah, we've talked, we've chatted about writing. We've been writing books kind of in tandem the whole time. So
gone through the trenches. Actually, you were like a big inspiration for me writing. Like as you were, coming to the meetings and the groups and talking about what your journey was like, there were parts of me like, oh my God, that sounds so frightening. And then the other part was like, I want to do that. I can't wait to do that. So, you getting your books off the ground, I think really helped kind of push me forward a great deal. So thank you for the inspiration.
oh gosh, you're welcome. I mean, I find you're quite inspiring too, and I like to follow you, especially on Instagram. It's really fun to follow you there because you're really in the trenches. You're really like literally sometimes writing in your posts and
Mhm.
just talking about that whole process, and it's really cool. And I like all the funny posts too because they really crack me up. So everybody follow Dennis on Instagram. Totally, you will be very glad you did. So
If you need a laugh, just pop on. I got
I
something there for you.
unless you're the guy, yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your history, Dennis, and then we'll dig into some writing process questions and talk about what you're doing. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So I have from your website, Dennis K. Crosby grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, and completed his undergraduate work at the University of Illinois Chicago with a degree in criminal justice. He spent 6 years working as a private investigator. Wow. His
Yeah.
love of learning about and better understanding people led him to pursue a master's degree in forensic psychology. And so then you transition to social service, and you've worked with men and women experiencing challenge with mental health and addiction, which is wonderful. And you're a staunch advocate of mental health reform, social justice, and efforts to combat homelessness, which is wonderful. And you've had a passion for writing. That you didn't pursue the finer points up till later in life.
Yeah.
So, and you came to San Diego, as you mentioned, connected with some of us in the writing community there, and you just really got this series off the ground. I'm just so impressed and just in awe. And you've been killing it on social media. And so
Thank you.
I now, Death's Legacy is an Amazon best-selling urban fantasy novel. Congrats for that.
Thank you.
2020, and now you've got Death's Debt, and then you're working on the third in the series, yes?
That is correct. Is now titled Death's Despair.
Death's Despair. Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
well, since I'm still reading your first book, I'll try not to get, hopefully, but we can talk a little bit about the main character, things like that, because you really
For
like
sure.
a lot. All right, so Dennis, let's talk about your journey with urban fantasy. When did you learn that you wanted to write it as a genre?
You know what's interesting is I wanted to, well, when I started writing, I wanted to write a vampire novel. My goal was to write like the definitive vampire novel.
Cool.
I had no humility, but I also had no clue about writing. And I I soon found that every time I would start writing, this book, it essentially was like a journal entry for whatever happened to that day. And I just turned the main character into a vampire novel, but it's really just me.
Yeah.
And it was, I lost interest because I didn't have a connection to it. I didn't have a connection to it because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know the difference between genres. To me, it was a vampire novel. It wasn't necessarily horror or urban fantasy. It was just I had an interest in vampires and wanted to do this. And that was probably early. It was late '90s, early 2000s, and I'd say about 10 years ago is when I really like dug in and got into writing, learning about the craft and
Mhm.
three-act structure and the need for conflict and compelling character development. And that helped me a lot. It kind of helped. propel a lot of the stories that I was starting to write. Um, Everything I wrote though always had some type of magical slant to it or supernatural slant to it. And I think it comes from my upbringing. My I grew up just in awe of sci-fi and fantasy and comic books and anything involving immortality, superpowers, traveling through time and space. I was right there for it. And so it just kind of became a natural progression, I think, for me to as I'm telling stories to always add some of those elements in. And before I knew it, I was an urban fantasy guy. Um, I like I like telling stories that are rooted in the real world, but that have these elements of wonder and
Yeah.
magic and just kind of that whole what if thing. And I've also been just in love with Greek mythology probably since I was like 8, 9 years old.
I can tell in
Um,
the book. Yeah.
yeah,
Really cool because I've always liked it too. So
yeah. And so adding that really felt kind of a natural progression for me
right.
too as the story was developing. Yeah.
That's so cool, and it feels like in a lot of ways, you're having these extraordinary things happen in the world, which kind of reminds me of Marvel, and
Hmm.
heroes in Marvel, and I think of course when I'm reading about Cassidy, I think there's a little bit of Jessica Jones to Cassidy.
There is a lot. I was influenced by that character once the show came out for sure. I didn't
Right.
read Jessica Jones as much in the comics, but the show was phenomenal,
It
and
was, yeah.
her character arc, there was so much depth and
Hmm.
emotion into it. Um, and so yeah, she was definitely an influence, as was Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Absolutely.
Um, there's a show, I don't know how many people watch it, but I think it's great. Winona Earp.
Oh
She's
yeah,
got a
great show.
she's
Great show.
yeah, she's kind of got a Jessica Jones vibe with her too. So I yeah, I think those three characters especially really influenced what Cassidy eventually, became.
So Cassidy is, I think I'm really connecting with her on the level of empathy, that she's an empath, that she
Hmm.
feels so much, and it can be overwhelming, and and a lonely journey too. Even if
Yeah.
you're feeling so much, that you're still just really achingly lonely, and I just
Hmm.
completely identify with that. But why don't you tell us what Death's Legacy, what your series is about? We've talked about the main heroine, and she's fantastic, but let's dig into, if you want to sum it up for readers.
This is where I always have trouble because there's like once I start talking about her, I like get all excited.
That's great. I mean, that's what we're here for.
But the series is about a woman named Cassidy Simmons who grew up, with these abilities, with these empathic powers. She's able to feel everything and everyone around her, all their emotions. And when she was younger, they certainly got the better of her. She would kind of act out, and people didn't know what was going on, and she didn't realize until later it wasn't necessarily her that was acting out. She was acting on behalf of what she was feeling from someone else.
Yeah.
And because of the way she acted, she developed this reputation in town as kind of this troublemaker, this crazy girl, this strange girl, and she didn't really develop well, socially. She was kind of an outcast, and so that bit of trauma kind of led her down a path where she didn't necessarily care if she lived or died at some
Hmm.
point. Um, then she was given an opportunity to have power, to have these abilities to essentially usher souls to the afterlife as a reaper. And she thought about it. She thought about her past. She thought about, what would it be like to finally have this power to not have people, walk all over her the way they had been, for 18 years up to that point. And so she took the offer. And as a reaper, she developed very quickly with her powers. And it turns out there's a piece of her lineage that was already inside that actually kind of enhanced her reaper
Oh,
abilities. And the individual, Azrael, who's the angel of death, he recognized some of that. And what he wanted to do was, utilize that power for himself. And so she caught wind of this and decided to fight against that. She didn't want to be used anymore. She was tired of it. She realized she had this ability. She wanted to be left alone. And
yeah.
so they got into a little bit of a battle, and she won, or at least she thought she won. And the first book, Death's Legacy, takes place 20 years after that event. Um, Azrael is coming back, and he's mad. He wants his power. He wants her head. And so the story is a journey of her having to battle him, but also having to battle some elements of herself. She's still very afraid. She still has a lot of insecurities. She's dealing with still a great deal of trauma and guilt for things that have gone on in her life. And so the story is really her journey to figure out who she is, to accept who she is, and finally kind of take control of Cassidy, to take control of that destiny that she has ultimately.
That's really cool. And I love too, like the fact that she's a Reaper, and then you look at that really cool image of her there.
Yeah, I wanted, so when I started writing the story, I had this element where all Reapers are able to turn their hands into sickles.
Really cool.
And when I decided to when I was working on the cover design, I mentioned that to the designer, and I'm like, yeah, so her hand kind of turns into a sickle, like when she wants to use her powers, and like her eyes are silver, and they're like, oh, we can do that, no problem. And
Yeah.
so when I first saw that cover, like, oh my God, that's perfect. That's exactly what I saw. So
So cool.
yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. So you've mentioned some of the influences on your writing, and I wondered if there are any others that you'd like to talk about as having been influential in your life. You talked about mythology, Buffy, and a bit of Jessica Jones, and so what would you say are some other influences from? It could be books, shows, TV, whatever.
So when it comes to books, books and authors, particularly, there's an author named Chloe Neal who writes the Chicagoland Vampire series,
Oh, cool.
and it's a fabulous series. Takes place obviously in Chicago, and what I liked so much about that was how much she included the city. Very much that urban fantasy feel.
Right.
There's magic, there's supernatural creatures, but it's all happening like in areas I know.
Yeah.
And I try to capture some of that in my own work.
Cool.
The way that she develops the story over time and the characters over time, I thought was really really fabulous. Carrie Arthur, um, Kelly Armstrong, uh, those authors, I think the three of them actually have these strong female protagonists, and I read a lot of their work really to get us and got a sense of what to do, what not to do with a
Yeah.
female. It's kind of as a male author, you really want to be very careful not to fall into those stereotypes.
Yeah.
You don't want to, get too tropey. You don't want to get too cliche. And with all characters, ultimately, you want those people to feel like people, right? It's not just a caricature. It's not just a series of characteristics. You want to have people relate to exactly what they're going through. And I was able to do that with the work that all those three authors were able to put out. And so I wanted to try to emulate some of that in my work as well.
Yeah, you definitely nailed it with Cassidy. I feel like she's very real,
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
She's not a flat tropey character at all. And I like too that, kind of going with the theme that she has her own literal inner demons.
Very much so. And some of that also comes from my work. So you mentioned I switched from
Yeah.
private investigation to social work, and working with individuals that struggle with mental health challenges and addiction, I think it's helped give me a I don't know, more broad understanding of people and the human condition.
Right.
And you can't get more real than that. And so I have kind of some of those elements in Cassidy, and I want to make sure that again that's not trivialized. I want to make sure I'm being respectful of folks that have those challenges. Also, though, being respectful to the character, making sure it's her journey, and respectful to the story itself. Because readers, they can sniff it out when it's not authentic and when it feels like it's forced. So
Exactly.
yeah, I'm just very careful with that to make sure that there's nothing that's off, in those stories.
Sounds good. And then, how much would you say your background is woven into this? Particularly, I'm interested in the PI aspect of your background. Like, how much would you say that is woven into these stories and what you write?
It's in there in the sense of my observations of people. Cassidy is sort of a PI. She's an expert in location, so she finds people and finds people that don't want to be found, and that can be a tricky part of the job at times. I've done I don't know how many locates in my during my 6 year career, and it can be difficult. And I don't touch on that as much in this particular storyline. Once the storyline's wrapped up, we'll probably get kind of a little deeper into the work that she really does. Um, but I think understanding people, she's an empath, so she understands them emotionally. But understanding them on a different level, I think, is important too. And I think her work as a locate specialist really kind of feeds into that for her.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, when you talk about Chicago and this urban setting, which of course is a hallmark of urban fantasy, is that it's
Hmm.
fantasy that takes place in cities or urban environments. And so, how
Hmm.
much would you say is Chicago basically a character in a way, or is it a background?
It is. It can. If it's done well, it can be a character for sure. I think right now I have it more as that backdrop,
Mhm.
but there are so many. It's the beauty of urban fantasy. You can do so much with it, and your backdrop eventually does become kind of that character in and of itself. There are so many stories throughout the history of Chicago that are fascinating, and it's got a pretty rich history. So drawing on some of that, that's definitely coming. I've got some elements of that coming in book three.
Cool.
Yeah, so kind of digging into some of those legends, haunted house legends, and
Oh yeah.
the old wives' tales and things of that nature. The organized crime
Oh
element as
yeah, that has
well.
an angle too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, Chicago's great. It's a wonderful city.
It is.
It is very much. It's a diverse city. There's pockets of various neighborhoods and not just ethnic denominations, but religious denominations. And I don't know. I think it's a fun city to be in. It's
It
yeah.
is. I've
It's
only been once, but I can't wait to go back. So
yeah. I
left a good
try
impression.
to try to skip summer, try to skip
Oh yeah,
winter, but
I was there in the summer, but it still left a good impression. So
yeah, no, it's a wonderful town, and it's one that is. I spent 30 years of my life there, and in that 30 years, it evolved. Um,
yeah, yeah,
so and that'll just continue. It just gets more and more beautiful each year.
excellent. So when you're writing these books, and talking about Chicago, but other aspects of it, how do you approach world building to make this urban fantasy more realistic for your readers?
So I'm a big proponent of kind of throwing anything out there and seeing what works, what feels right. Again, it's about being organic when you're writing and making sure that it doesn't feel forced. There were some things that I put in the very early drafts of Death's Legacy that once I started reading through, I'm like, no, I don't think that needs to be in there. You want to keep that out. I talk a lot about urban fantasy being this place where you live in a city, you open this magical door and you go through. And I actually had a magical door in one of the first drafts. I'm like that. It just feels too tropey. Let's pull that back. So yeah, I think it's world building has you start with something that's real, and then you go to those what ifs.
Right.
And if it seems or feels like it's plausible, even in this fantastic world, I'm willing to throw it in. I'm willing to kind of take the leap forward and jump in.
Cool.
Um, what I also like to do is a lot of flashbacks, right? I like to go back in time and to kind of inform what's happening in the present. And there's a lot of mythology in my books, and so with that, I can go nuts.
Oh
I
yeah.
can have centaurs and satyrs and whatever. Um, so that's I think where I get a lot of that's where I can get a little crazy. Again, not too crazy, but have a little bit more fun. And save that for that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. So, like, in addition to urban fantasy, what are some other subgenres of fantasy or other genre fiction that you really like?
Strangely enough, I am afraid of horror movies. I've been afraid of horror movies all my life. I saw The Exorcist when I was 5, and that did not set me up well for the horror genre. Ironically, I write horror short stories. There are even some elements. I think urban fantasy is kind of under the umbrella of horror when you really think about it.
Yeah, it can
Um,
be for sure.
yeah, and so I didn't fancy myself really a horror writer. Like I said, when I started writing that vampire novel, I didn't think of vampires as
Yeah,
horror. It's just a type of creature that I always really like enjoyed and
yeah,
loved watching. Um, so yeah, over the last, I think, well, since I've been in San Diego, really, I've realized that I've shifted into that mode, and I write ghost stories and haunted house stories and weird spooky things. And so yeah, urban fantasy, like really like solid horror. I'm going to start working on a mystery novel probably once this particular arc is done for Cassidy. Um, and I'm excited about that. That's going to be fun. And people have always asked, why didn't you do that in the first place? You were a PI for 6 years. You've got these degrees in criminal justice and psychology. Why wouldn't you do that in the first place? I'm like, because I didn't want to put a demon in it. I want to keep that sacred. And so, yeah, that one, when I start the mystery stuff, it will not cross over into this particular universe. It'll be
okay.
completely
I was going
separate.
to ask if it was at all related to this universe. So,
Yeah, I'll keep those. I'll keep those separate. I do like the idea of shared universes, and in fact, there are several characters in my novels that will eventually have their own
um,
stories, their own
that's
books.
great.
Yeah, so
I love
they'll be able to share it in that regard.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to know what's your typical writing day like? Like you sit down and how is it for you? What's the process?
So for me, I used to. I think a lot of writers do this. They beat themselves up over word count. Daily word count. I got to get in 3,000 words a day. I got to get in 2,000, 1,000, whatever it might be. And I did that for a long time, and it took the fun out of writing for me for a
Yeah.
while. Putting that pressure on myself and not meeting it. You know,
Yeah. If there's
it
too much expectation and things go
right.
wrong and you're tired, etc.
Exactly. And you know exactly how it is because you've got the day job, you've got that for
Right.
8 hours, and now what? I'm supposed to write for another two? It's like, no, I just want to chill and watch football.
Yeah. You're kind of done.
Um,
You're like,
right. So after I saw a video from by Scott Sigler. He was giving some tips and pointers on writing and word counts and things like that. And he said what worked for him was setting a weekly goal.
yeah. That's
Because if you got a weekly goal, you've got 7 days now to try
right.
to achieve that. And once I started doing that, things really opened up. If I missed a day, I could catch up the next day. If I was short one week, I could make it up the next week. Just a lot less pressure. So
It is.
yeah, and so now when I go to work, I get off at 4:30 or 5, and these days I do most of my writing. It's hard for me to write at home still,
Yeah.
so I like to write in coffee shops.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll find one. Typically, it's down here in San Diego. It's Lestat's.
That was
Um,
one of my favorite places to go and write too.
isn't that great? It's
Oh,
just
I love
yeah,
Miss Stats. Yeah.
got great music. They got food. They got
Yeah.
obviously got coffee, and it
Really good
doesn't get so
coffee.
loud. It's not
Right.
like
Well, there's a lot of other writers in there too, I think.
exactly,
So
exactly.
it's
So
a,
it's not distracting.
yeah, except when there's vintage rockers that come in, and then you're like, that guy from that band. Anyway,
Right?
or maybe they're Nosferatu. I don't know. I'm not gonna judge. It's all good, right? So
If we can only hope.
right. It's
So yeah, so when I get there, when I sit down to write, I try to make sure I do at least 1,000 words, and then anything after that is gravy for me. So I typically average about 1,400, maybe
that's great.
1,500. Yeah,
That's pretty considerable.
yeah.
And so, kind of leading into that and having seen your posts, I've got to know what's your go-to snack or beverage?
I, I might be sipping it now. I don't know.
Is that writer's tears? Hmm.
It is.
Yeah.
I I found this bottle, man, I don't know, 6 years ago maybe. I thought it was a joke. I didn't realize it was like real whiskey. Someone
Yeah.
sent it to me. I'm like, that looks. They sent me a picture of it. I'm like, that looks interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And I finally found it, and I'm like, ooh. And then like my first bottle, I saved. I said, I'm not gonna open this up till I have something significant happen with my writing.
All right. Good reward.
Yeah, and so it sat on my shelf for about a year, and then I finally signed my contract with Acorn Publishing, and so that was the first time I cracked it open.
That
And
works.
now I open it every time every time something fun happens, something like a milestone or something to celebrate.
Great.
That's the go-to.
All right. Well, that's
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah, I've seen it on your Instagram feed, and I was like, I've got to know what this Matters Tears is. Um, so you've talked about your normal day, about your special treat, and I wanted to know what would your dream writing project be?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Um,
Don't hold back. Just speak it into the universe. Mhm.
I would. So, we've got mutual friends that get into media tie-in.
Right.
And I would love to tackle, an existing property, maybe tell a story about that. I love the show Supernatural. There are some elements, that kind of influence some of my Death's Legacy and Death's Dead. I'd love to do a a novel of that. I would also, eventually, maybe once I get a little more mature in my writing, it'd be great to like write a script or at least a treatment for, another supernatural movie or maybe a. I know they've got a new show coming out soon
Awesome. I didn't
with
know
the
that.
parents, but
Oh, that's great.
yeah. So I would love to write in that universe. Um,
You'd be a great fit for that, for sure.
thank you. I would also love to do something that I still have a love for vampires. There are vampire characters in my novel. Um, there is my very first book, which was completely awful. It's not out. It's sitting on a thumb drive. Um, but that character, she's going to get her own novel soon, and I would really love to write something that would be considered canon for like Dracula or
Yes.
some other existing vampire property. I'd love to just kind of be involved. And I don't know which one. It'd probably be a Dracula story. Um, but yeah, just kind of being in that universe, I think would be really cool.
Awesome. That would be great. Well, I hope you do it. I hope you do both those things because it sounds
Thank
right up your alley. So, this is something that I recently kind of dwelled on, and I wanted to see what you thought.
you. Okay.
Who do you feel supported you the most in your endeavor as a writer at any point of your life, now or in the past?
Well, if I don't say my mother, she will get mad at me. So,
Okay,
um,
good call.
yeah. I mean, but it's true. She truly has. She's fallen in love with my characters.
Oh,
She's
that's great.
gotten mad when I've hurt them.
Aw.
she, I posted something a few weeks ago about one of the characters, and I said, give them your thoughts and prayers, folks, because we don't know what's going to happen next. And she immediately she's, no, what are you doing?
Aw,
Um,
that's so cool.
so yeah, so she's been truly just a great supporter.
Oh,
Um, and then, I would the just the entire writing community in San Diego. I
oh,
mean,
it's pretty good.
yeah, how solid it is here, and we support each other fiercely
Totally.
um, with everything that we do.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I've said this to my friends in the past. I don't know that my writing career be what it is now, had I not moved here.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Chicago has a community and it's pretty strong, but I wasn't tapped into it. I felt like it was a little challenging to tap into at times.
I completely.
Um,
Seattle felt
yeah,
like that for me too.
really, yeah. Yeah, this place has just been, it's just kind of enveloped me with just open arms. And
It's pretty special.
yeah, for sure, for sure. So I would say, most of the writers that I know here have definitely been an influence or a support. Um, my family, when I first moved to San Diego, my cousin and his wife um, sponsored me. I moved out here with nothing, no job, and they were like, "Yeah, you need to come out here. This is where it's at." And so I moved out here in 2014, and I stayed with them for the first year that I was here. And without them, I would not have had a place to stay. I would not have had any really roots or grounding. So they were certainly great support for me starting out.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you had it because now the world gets the benefits of your writing and you're feeling anchored in the community. And I do think it is worth seeking out one's community wherever you are. If it happens to be online, that's valid. And of course, in the past couple of years, we've had to do that. And that has got me through moving across the country and back and then ending up in a new city in Southern California, in the LA area. So I feel like I miss the in person San Diego crowd, but I still talk to you guys and enjoy being
yeah.
tangentially part of the community still.
I think that's the beauty of it too, is that it doesn't matter where you are. Once you've been here, you're always, a part of it.
Yeah, I feel the love every time I go back.
Yeah, exactly, exactly,
Oh, well, this is so cool. I'm so glad that you had those positive supporters in your life. It just makes all the difference in the world.
for sure. One of the other influences I had early on too, um, obviously I talked about you and how kind of watching your journey was a great influence. Um, Indy Quillen, did you met?
Oh, she's fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah. So Indy, I followed her, journey early on with her tracker, the Fox
Yeah.
Walker series, and it was fun watching that too. And that was very much an inspiration. And she actually turned me on to my first writers conference. I wouldn't have gone to that conference had she not, suggested it.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, and it was there that I met the folks that eventually became my publisher, and I met just a host of other writers. And it's again just kind of being in that community. You felt at home. I didn't feel like a stranger. I was nervous at first when I first walked in, and then like somebody called me by my name. I didn't even know who they were, and like, "You're Dennis Crosby." I'm like, "Yeah, how do you know me?" I read your book. I'm like, "Oh my god." So yeah, it was a fun experience. And yeah, the crowd, the community, so incredibly supportive.
Fantastic. Oh, I love that. So, you talked a bit about some projects you've got going on. Can you talk about any others in the works? Like you've got the third in the book, you know, Death's Despair,
Third,
and then what's happening after that? Like, what's the long term goal with that? So,
so I'm probably gonna wrap this storyline up in 4 books, possibly 5, but I'm definitely at least 4. I've I like Cassidy, and it seems a lot of other people do too. So once this storyline's wrapped up, I plan to really continue in putting her in some other type of peril. I don't know what she'll be at that point yet. I had an idea about how the first few books would go, and that's kind of vastly changed already. So it's very organic for me. It's a malleable thing. So yeah, this story arc will get at least 4, and we'll throw her into something else. I'm gonna jump into the mystery genre as well,
yeah,
um,
that'd be
and
great.
then I'll continue with short stories. I actually had my first 2 published last year. I've got 4 coming out this year. 2 already came out. I've got 2 more coming,
Congrats.
um, and that's been fun too.
Yeah.
It's a great.
Let's talk about short fiction and how that's good for us as right.
Yeah, it's very good. I think it teaches us to slow down a bit. And ironically, Death's Legacy started out as a young adult short story,
Mhm.
and then it morphed into a young adult novel because I could not keep things condensed.
Yeah.
Um, and then I realized I wasn't mature enough to write young adult, so I had to make it adult. Um, So, I struggled with short stories for a long time because I try to write, 3, 4,000 words. I'm like, I can't tell a story in this space. And I'm not quite sure what it was that triggered it for me, but I think, I had a really good um it was a suggestion that said take a novel and look at a chapter of that and look at how you would maybe just expand or just tell that particular story.
Yeah.
Give it, somewhat of a three-act structure, make some conflict, start right in the middle of the action, and then, finish that action up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it seems so simple, right? It just makes so much
I mean,
sense.
you'd think it would be, but it is actually, if you're used to writing longer fiction, it is a challenge.
Yeah,
I think it's a worthy one for novelists. I'm
absolutely.
really getting on the soapbox about this lately and trying to encourage novelists to write short fiction
Yep.
because it is such a really good exercise. I think it's made my long fiction better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
It's
it
a
makes the
really
scenes that
interesting
you write,
process. Yeah.
yeah, makes the scenes you write stronger,
Yes, exactly.
you know?
Because you have to do that condensed version
Yep,
of everything going on, and that's tricky, you know.
exactly.
Especially
Exactly.
when like you have there's different forms of short stories. You know, there's everything from drabbles, which are really tiny, to
Hmm.
longer short stories, which can be up to 10,000 words, and everywhere
Yeah.
flash fiction. You know, and so I like to experiment now that I've got into it,
Hmm.
and play in that universe. It's a challenge, but I think a challenge is good for us as writers. We have to
Definitely.
It's like as if we're kind of like exercise. You don't want to do the same thing all the time every day. You have to kind of switch it up,
Yep.
and it makes you healthier, stronger, and more malleable and more flexible, I should say. And I feel the same about short fiction.
Yeah. And it keeps you writing too.
Exactly.
I had a struggle last year. Like I wanted to start Death's Despair last summer, like right after I finished Death's Debt, and I was struggling getting into the groove.
Yeah.
And so when the new year came, I'm like, I gotta start doing something. Either to get this novel done, or I got to switch to another novel. I got to do something. And I
Hmm.
just started, looking at short story calls, anthology
Yes.
calls. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll get into this for a little bit and let's see what happens. And yeah, it's so it, it, it's a muscle that you need to exercise for
Mhm.
sure if you're a writer. And if you're struggling, I think what helped me also was writing a story in my universe
Oh yeah, for
instead of
sure. I think
creating something completely different at first. I'd write something or use someone from the universe and just kind of give them, you know, a,
like a
a
little
day in a life.
side
Or
quest.
yeah, exactly, exactly. It was something I was already comfortable with. I kind of knew that
Right.
world. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel too much. Just throw
Yeah.
something crazy at them.
I do that too. I've done that with Quester's On Saga. I have a collection. It's not finished yet, but it's getting close. That I
Mm-hmm.
would have to do probably myself, since that series is published by me, but probably will be the last one that is.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell some other stories about some of the many characters that are different
Mm-hmm.
species in those books, and they get their time to shine. Whereas in the main saga, they're all kind of dealing with the same threat, the same
Exactly.
thing, but you throw them into their own adventures, and then you never know what's going to happen there. And it's a lot of fun to put our characters in those situations, I think.
Yeah. Especially those fun side characters because sometimes they
Yeah,
don't get enough,
you
and
need that
people,
spotlight.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a couple characters in Death's Legacy. My mother loves this. I don't know if you've gotten to this scene yet. It's early on in the book where Cassidy is walking home and she runs into this woman who's got this like food truck, hot chocolate she sells, and there's kids playing at
Yes.
the park.
Yes. I
My
have.
mother is fascinated with this woman.
Huh.
Like she is absolutely fascinated with this woman. I'm like, she was my that chapter was kind of like my save the cat moment for Cassidy, and I explained that to my mother. And she goes, "Yeah, but there's something going on. Like you got to really." I said, "Okay, maybe I'll give her a
Yeah,
short
Cassidy.
story one day."
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so you never know which characters are going to kind of jump out at people, and sometimes
Right.
they're fun to write a little side quest for.
Well, not only, it can be concurrent, it could also be in the past.
Exactly,
That's where
exactly,
I'm having some fun, is kind of playing with that, as
and
well as,
showing what leads up to it. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, kind of the stories that shape those
Mm,
side characters.
yep, Yep.
they're real to us as well. It's not always
Absolutely.
just the main character.
Yeah.
That's great. Um, so you said that you had short stories and some anthologies. Can you tell us what those are?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first when it came out last year, was in the Castle of Horror anthology. So Castlebridge Media came out. They've got a series called Thinly Veiled, and last year they did Thinly Veiled the '70s, and the call was for '70s themed horror story. So you take something from pop culture in the '70s, give it a horror slant. And mine was, I did a horror take on Sanford and Son,
Awesome.
and it was so much fun to write.
Sounds like a blast. I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
that
it
show.
was just kind of, and I started rewatching the series as well, kind of getting a feel for those
Yeah.
two. So that was my first short story published, and I thought it was a lot of fun. It was really personally fulfilling for me, just to finally have something out as a short story publication. I also did last year a story called Rise of the Diva, which is a short story prequel to Death's Legacy.
Oh, cool.
So it introduces the main villain, who you'll find at the end of this novel, and who is pretty prevalent in Death's Debt and subsequent novels. Um, so that was fun to write. Again, that's kind of that, sharing that world, telling a story,
Yeah.
going back in time and showing what led up to uh, the start of this series. And then this year I've got four out. So Castle Bridge again, they did another Thinly Veiled called Thinly Veiled the '80s.
Awesome.
Same idea. And I was torn between like which shows to pick. Originally, I was going to do a Knight Rider horror take, and I'm thinking back, and I'm like, it'd be great to like the car was possessed or something, and I'm like, well, first that's too Christine, and second, they already had like the evil kit car. They had
Oh, yeah, that's
so I'm like that it's been done. I'm not even going to worry about that one.
yeah.
Instead, I chose 21 Jump Street.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So that story it's in volume 8, and it's called Jump, and it takes place in the church that was their headquarters.
Yeah, yeah, cool.
It's got some twists and turns in it, but it is a fun read, and it
Oh, I love it.
centers on the female detective, on Judy Hobbs. I did a short story in an anthology called Blood Fiction, and
Cool.
the call for this was essentially anything that's kind of like creepy, bloody, violent, something extreme. This was actually my first story that does not involve anything supernatural. It's a story of an assassin
Hmm.
who's got a target, and the target happens to be the groom of his ex-girlfriend.
Oh,
Yeah, and he's in the church as they're getting married, and has to pull the trigger. So the story takes place kind of around that time, and
wow.
him trying to decide what to do. And there's some flashback sequences in there that inform, where he is at this point in his life. That one's called Just Be Hootie. If you want to find out why, you'll have to buy the story
All
or buy
right.
the book.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I've got a story coming out in September. Well, tomorrow, September.
Yeah.
So in about 3 weeks, I believe. Gabby Triana is putting together an anthology of ghost stories that take place around Halloween called Literally Dead. And I've got a story in that called Bootsy's House,
Cool.
set in Chicago. It's not in the Cassidy Simmons universe, but set in Chicago. Two guys break into a house that is presumed to be haunted, and that story just kind of talks about what happens to them during that Halloween night.
Ooh, I love the sound of that. Love how
Yeah.
awesome.
And then I've got one more called Best Interest of the Clients, and it takes place in a law firm. Another spooky one. This one's coming out through Scare Street.
Okay.
And basic premise is it's kind of a revenge novel, but it involves a lot of supernatural elements, a little bit of Greek mythology in that one as well.
Cool.
Not in the Cassidy universe, just a really kind of freaky horror story.
Oh, love it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty exciting. You got all kinds of great stuff coming.
Yeah, it was a good year for short stories. My plan was to just do one more than I did last year, and I was able to get, an extra one. So two
Outstanding.
last year, four this year, and I've got one that's out that's I'm waiting to hear back to see if it gets accepted. So we'll
Cool.
we'll see.
Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Yes, yes, yes.
All right, well, here's another question for you. If you could have any power of any one of your characters, which one would you like to have the most?
Man. Um, Surprisingly, the power that I really want, none of my characters have, and I'm surprised I haven't really added that in.
Okay, so what is.
I I'm a big fan of telepaths.
Oh, yeah. Well, biased here, so am I. Yeah.
I guess Cassidy kind of has it with the empathic ability,
There's a
but
difference, though. Yeah.
there's a major difference, yeah. And so like I love, Professor X and
Right.
uh,
Huge influence. Yep.
yeah, Emma Frost, those
Yep.
types of characters. And I don't have one that really has that ability. And I think the challenge that I find with that particular character is trying to find a solid weakness. I know that they have like Professor X is not so much a weakness, but he tries to use more of this moral guide when using his powers.
Right.
Um, and I want something more than that. Just I like a little more bite to it. I haven't really decided or figured out what that could be for somebody.
Hmm.
Um, so if I'm just picking somebody from my world, I would probably go with Jason Lucas. And in my series, he's what's called an advocate.
Okay.
He's very mysterious. We don't know if he's good or bad.
Hmm.
Um, he gives advice, but it's very cryptic, kind of like like Yoda.
He's a
Uh,
wizard.
he gives advice. He kind of makes some suggestions, but he won't tell you why. He won't. It's clear that he knows more than he's telling.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out what that is and why he's doing this. But
Right.
he's kind of like his power is almost like Q from Star Trek.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's kind of how it is in my head. I'll probably condense that a little bit more, but yeah, that's kind of where it is right now.
Cool.
So yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, we're coming down to the last few questions I have, and one of them I love to ask every writer, no matter the genre, and that is, what is the worst writing advice you've ever received?
Hmm. Um, I was just talking about this a few weeks ago too. I went up to Sacramento to see my mother for her birthday, and I don't know that it was necessarily advice. It was kind of a mandate. I was writing something for someone else, and my writing style is not loose, but I'm pretty liberal with certain things.
Okay.
And I am notorious for starting a sentence with the word and
Done that
it'll
too.
yeah. I don't know many writers that haven't. Like I've read plenty of books and I've seen that sentence. And usually when I do it, it's like that one-off sentence, right? It's just one sentence right in the middle to really emphasize something.
Yeah.
And so I was told very harshly, you never start a sentence with and. I'm like, I know, I remember that from sixth, seventh grade, but I'm in my 40s now.
Right.
I can kind of do what I want.
You want.
And so every time I start a sentence with and, I chuckle. I do,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I'm doing it anyway, and
Right.
it's going to be okay. So yeah, I think, like I said, not advice so much as the mandate. In terms of advice, I don't know that I've received anything too bad. I'm very particular about who I go to for advice.
Wise.
Yeah. I think I've learned that at least over the years. And I think
Yeah,
there's only a few
that
people
takes.
that I'd probably even reach out to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of the same way. There's a very few. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. All right. Well,
Yeah.
and I agree.
See how it flows? It just
It just does. It's natural, and we love it. So.
exactly.
Well, let's flip that. And what's the best writing advice that you've ever received? If you could crystallize it down to one
Um,
or more than one, whatever you want to do.
I think the best advice I got is one that I really share often, and that is, and we've talked about it, find your community,
Yep.
find other writers to connect with,
Mhm.
and no matter what level of they are in their career,
Yes. Yes.
because everyone has something to contribute.
Exactly. And we all start somewhere. So
Hmm.
being part of a community in which everybody is at different levels is a strength, not a weakness. So,
Exactly. I found that in when I was working as a private investigator, even in social service, there are good days and bad days. And when it comes to whether it's good or bad, it's challenging sometimes to find someone that understands what that is.
yes.
As an investigator, my a great day for me was going out for 8 hours, and let's say I sat in my car for 8 hours, right? And then I finally got somebody coming out of the house and going somewhere on that eighth hour, and they came out, they mowed their lawn, and they're not supposed to mow the lawn because the doctor told them they need to be in bed. They have to have bed rest. They're not supposed to do anything. And so
Yeah.
getting any type of activity, is a good thing. I spent 8 hours in the car doing nothing. I got 30 minutes of tape of them doing something. That's a win. That becomes a good day.
Yeah.
Um, Catching somebody, and this actually happened, following somebody from their house, from Chicago in just across the border in Indiana, and literally watching them build a house for a 6 hour period. They're working, they're bending and stretching and lifting, all the restrictions that the doctor says they can't do. Um, they're breaking those, and it's difficult sometimes to translate that to people that aren't in the field. You
Hmm.
know,
Okay.
Same with social service. Good days, bad days. It's hard one. You can't share it because of HIPAA in many cases, but people don't often get it. When it comes to writing, it's the same thing. It's hard for people to relate, but other writers can. And so
Exactly.
when you're going through something, when you have questions, when you're struggling, having that community, I think, is really what helps keep people going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
So
great.
find your community. That's the best advice I got. That's the best I'm going to give.
Oh, well, it's perfect.
And
It's
trust
great.
your editor.
Well, yeah, there's that too. Oh, editors are our heroes, actually.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like for listeners and readers to know about?
I don't think so. I mean, that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm fun. I got fun stories. I've got
You do.
fun characters.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, if you have questions at any time, I'm pretty easy to find online.
Yeah, where can we find you online?
So my website is denniskcrosby.com,
Okay.
Instagram at Dennis K. Crosby, Twitter, same thing at Dennis K. Crosby. I'm also on Facebook. If you go to my website, it'll have all the links to my social media.
Perfect.
But yeah, just you can follow me anywhere and see what kind of crazy antics I'm up to.
All right. Well, Dennis, thank you so much. Everybody run out, get Death's Legacy, get this series going. Nice and time for spooky season too. So
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
the best time of the year. All right, Dennison, well, it's just lovely to see you again, and I'm so excited for you and proud to know you.
I'm excited for you. You got some good stuff coming too. So let's not, we can't gloss over that. You've got a lot of stokes in the fire right now.
Oh, thank you.
I'm
But
I'm
this is
happy for you.
about you, so we're gonna.
I know. I'm just saying. I'm happy for you. Very happy for
Happy
you.
for you too. We were in the trenches together, and so
Definitely.
now we got some really cool stuff going on that feels really good. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and we now it's time for us to pass that, you know, pay it forward. So
Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
Well, it's so great to see you, and I look forward to hopefully doing another one of these when you've got more books coming out.
Thank you. I would love to. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.